Go ahead and call the meeting to order. And with that, we got the folks from Haddow, Ladson, and Chris here. But first, I'm going to introduce our city manager, Danny Robbins. I don't do that now. Let's go.
Yeah, this is the commercial study we commissioned a couple of months ago maybe. Came back today. This is the first time the city council has seen it. So they're going to present it to you, and we will put it on our website so everybody can see it. And we're also going to project on the TV, and we'll try to zoom in as much as we can. But the copies, once we have them, scan them in and email it, it'll be on the website for everybody to view. That's all I have here.
All right, with that being said, you guys are ready? Chris?
Thank you. First of all, Haddow companies, Ladson, Haddow, thanks for the opportunity to come and present today. The purpose of this presentation is to really look at the market opportunity downtown Loganville for the plan that's been presented. So what we'll do here is I will run through the research that we've done, and then Ladson will come and talk about our conclusions and recommendations. But first, we want to walk you through the research we've done and get started right there. Just 1 second. All right. Talk a little bit about our methodology. Obviously, a lot of it is, just research, looking at data, doing a lot of first-person surveying, particularly with regards to the apartment market, calling leasing agents at communities out there, talking to developers. So we look at all this information from a lot of different angles, and just reemphasize this is a draft study today. So everyone keep that in mind. As I mentioned, this is just looking at the market study. There's another component that would address the financial aspects of the proposed deal, but first we wanted to understand the market before we get into anything else. That's kind of the way it's been sequenced. Unfortunately, you can't see what I'm going to be talking about. Okay. All right. I'll just talk into it a little bit more as I get it. I think this will, yeah, that'll work. Might be too loud.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just tell you next slide. So next slide. If you could, I don't know if you could zoom it out a little bit so that skip through this. Start right there. Yeah, if you can zoom it out so you can see the whole. That's great. This is probably common sense for everybody in here, but we'd like to start out with just trying to understand the location geographically related to other areas. And what this map shows you is you're about 10 miles from Lawrenceville, 20 miles from Sugar Hill, and about 30 miles from downtown Atlanta, which I'm assuming a lot of people think is a good thing. So, next slide, please. This is just a context map. The area outlined in red there is just downtown Loganville, or the area that we were focused on. And just to try to help us get a familiarization with what's around downtown Loganville. And these boxes on there, what it shows you is there's high traffic counts on Highway 78 and on Loganville Highway. Almost over 40,000 cars a day on Highway 78. And it also shows you some of the big box retailers that are located out along 78. So you have kind of a vibrant corridor there with a lot of activity. Next slide, please. Again, this is just helping us get familiar with downtown Loganville, just showing the Walgreens and the CVS, the library, and then of course your Main Street, which is the backbone of downtown. This is the concept plan that's been presented to the city by the Connolly Group, and I'm assuming most people have seen the concept plan, but within the concept plan, it shows 57,000 square feet of retail, 38 townhomes, 600 apartments, and then 200 units of active adult apartments, as well as a new city hall and a library. Next slide. In February of 2017, a group called the Bleakley Advisory Group in TSW performed a study on a 3.8 acre site that the city owns in downtown. And just, we wanted to go back and look at that study to see what was in it, because we know that the city has commissioned it. And they looked at some different schemes for this 3.8 acre site. They looked at one that showed 167 apartments and 20,000 square feet of retail. One scenario was 47 townhomes, 15,000 square feet of retail. One showed a YMCA with some retail, and then one showed a hotel with some retail. Of the four concepts, concept A, the one with the apartments, was deemed the least viable given to the absorption that they estimated. Next slide. Obviously, to understand the apartment market, you can pull it out just a little bit. Obviously, to understand the apartment market and the opportunity in downtown Loganville, we wanted to survey other projects out there to see how they're doing. So what we did is we drew a 5-mile radius, which is that circle you see there around downtown Loganville, and then went outside of that in order to identify projects that would give us some indication of the health of the market. So we surveyed 9 projects, and it's hard to see here, but if you run your finger, if you could zoom into the bottom part maybe, right there. If you go across there, all the way to the right, the occupancy rate, the apartments were 95% occupied, which is considered a healthy occupancy rate, indicative of a strong market and good demand. And there's 2 projects in here that are in lease-up. Croft House Grayson, which you may have seen as you come in on Grayson Highway, and the other one is Populous at South Lawn, which is a project in downtown Lawrenceville that Novare Group did. So both of those are in lease-up, so they are not included in the occupancy rate because they're still leasing up units. They haven't stabilized yet. Populous at South Lawn is leasing over 20 units a month, doing pretty well. Then you see the average rent per square foot there, our average rent is about $1,200 or $1.15 per square foot. All right, next slide, please. This is very important to understand what's under construction and what's proposed, and how that could impact the opportunity in downtown Lawrenceville. So what you see on this map is the dots in yellow. Those are projects that are under construction, and that's a total of 3,600 units, and that looks at, basically we're focused on Gwinnett County. And the ones in orange are the projects that are proposed, and that's 1,538 units. And what you can see on the map is most of the activity is kind of along the 85 corridor. That's where most of the new apartments are being built. But again, as you can see, there's two that are being talked about closer to Loganville. One is number 19, which is a project they're talking about in downtown Snellville, 250 units. And the other one, number 20, is a project that Lennar, who's a big apartment developer, 350 units that they've just gotten zoning approval for. So you can see the activity is sort of moving in this direction. Next slide. This is a map that really overlays the apartment data on employment. So if you see those darker blue areas on the map, yeah, you might want to zoom in a little bit. Those darker blue areas, those are employment nodes. That's where there's a dense concentration of employment. And if you notice the pattern with the apartments that are under construction in the yellow there, again, most of those are tracking near those employment nodes. The orange, again, is the proposed, and then the green is projects that have recently been built. The one in downtown Lawrenceville, there's one called, one near downtown Snellville. But again, same thing, you can kind of see it's along the 85 corridor, but moving in this direction. Next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this, but these are just some of the demographic trends comparing the city of Loganville to Gwinnett County and to Walton County. The key takeaway here is in 2000, the city of Loganville, you had a population of 6,000. It's doubled. In 2019, you had almost 13,000 people. So there's been some growth. There's been population growth in the city, which is a good thing. Go to the next slide, please. Again, this is just looking at these same demographic trends and looking at it by radiuses, by radii, a 1, a 3, and a 5 mile radius. And again, the population growth has been pretty strong, 2% annually, which is a good rate. And another interesting stat here is the, if you look within a 1 mile radius of downtown, about 30% of the housing stock is renter-occupied housing stock. And as you move away from downtown, that percentage gets lower. Next slide. One thing we wanted to try to understand were commuting patterns. So what this shows you is within a 5 mile radius of downtown Loganville, there's 57,000 people who are employed, who are living within a 5 mile radius. Of those 57,000 people, 52,000 people are commuting out of that 5 mile radius. Primarily, they're commuting to Gwinnett County for jobs. About 5,000 people are staying put, working in this area, and then you got 14,000 people commuting in for jobs. But if you look down in the left there, that little inset, that white box, that shows you people are living here, but they're commuting back to the job centers over along 85 in Gwinnett County. Next slide, please. This just looks at population density. The darker colors mean there's more people in those different census tracts. These are divided up by census tracts. And as you can see, as you get up near Lawrenceville and over into Gwinnett County, you have the darker colors with less population density as you move into Walton County. Next slide, please. This is an important piece of information because what is being proposed in downtown Loganville, a lot of other cities have tried to do this or are doing this right now, trying to revitalize their downtowns. So one thing we wanted to do is just compare downtown Loganville to some of these other cities where they're currently undergoing new apartment development. They're trying to incentivize retail development. But this compares Loganville to Duluth, Lawrenceville, Lilburn, Norcross, Snellville, Sugarhill, and Sewanee. It's basically looking at population and employment density within a 3 mile radius of the downtown. And the takeaway here is that Loganville, within a 3 mile radius, you got about 35,000 people living in that area. And then you can see, Duluth, Lawrenceville, 64, 75,000 people. Most of these other cities have much greater population density near their downtowns. Yeah, if you could zoom into the employment, because this is the second metric, right? Yeah. And then if you look at 2017 for employment, you got about 11,000 people are working within 3 miles of downtown Loganville. And you can see these other downtowns have many more people working closer to the downtown core, which again speaks to demand, the question of demand. Next map, please. Just zoom in down to the bottom there. And what this looks at is what are they doing in these other downtowns right now? And this is apartments that are under construction, recently delivered or proposed within the core of the various downtowns. So in Lawrenceville right now, you have the one I just mentioned, Populous, has recently delivered, and then you have a 99-unit conclave at South Lawn, which is an active adult project, which is under construction. So a total of 428 units. Norcross, you got 193 units that are under construction. Snellville, they're talking about 250 units. Sugar Hill, they got 2 projects underway, 600 units. And then Sewanee, they've had one that's delivered and it's about leased up. And then they have another one that's just broken ground under construction for about a total of 482 units. So just gives you some idea of scale in terms of how many units are being built in other downtowns. And this is, again, a component of the proposal is retail space, which of course you need in your downtown. So what we wanted to do is to try to understand the health of the retail market. So we surveyed 4 of the called up to leasing agents to get the occupancy and rental rates of 4 of the newer centers out on Highway 78. And what we found is they were well occupied, getting good rents. So there's a lot of buying power out here. And obviously these retailers and developers know it, and these projects have done very well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Les.
Can you scroll down so we can see the table? You don't have that slide.
Yeah. There you see the occupancy rate, almost 92%. The rental rate, strong. It's on a net basis, 23.75. Loganville Station recently delivered, done very well, 9,000 square feet leased up. So all indicators say a healthy retail market. And not surprising given the traffic volume that I showed on that first slide. You got 40,000 cars a day, so a lot of drive-by traffic.
Yeah, and I guess just to speak, and apologies to the city council, I know y'all are a little confused why that's not in the book. We didn't realize that till this morning that didn't make it in, so we added it to the slides. But the North Logan Commons, which is the one that I guess is doing the worst, that's the one where Dick's and Lowe's are. A lot of what's accounting for a lot of that vacancy is more the big box space, the larger anchors. So when you look at the small spaces, the smaller shops, which is what would largely be taking up downtown Loganville in terms of what they're proposed, with all 4 of these centers that we've talked to, the demand seems to be strong for that type of use. Sorry to jump in without introducing myself. I'm Ladson Haddow, and Chris and I have collectively been with the firm for a little over 30 years, so we kind of run things together. And I was just going to, if you would, go back to the first page. What we tried to do is just sum up kind of our key findings, conclusions, and recommendations on the one page. I guess before diving into that, if you see the first page with the narrative, if you'll just go to the very top of it, and we'll just go bullet by bullet. But we're not big believers in a lot of forecasts and projections when it comes to rent growth, when it comes to absorption, etc. In our mind, nobody knows what's going to happen 6 months from now, much less 5 years from now. So we try to take a pragmatic approach of evaluating the market for where it stands today and where we think it's going from here. So I just wanted to kind of lead that as a segue. If you'd zoom in a little bit more so I can read, I guess as much as you can for the first one. The first bullet, which Chris already went over, but these are just kind of the top 5 are our summaries of our key findings of our research. The first one is that the apartment market in the surrounding area is healthy. As he said, 95% is a healthy occupancy rate, and $1.15 a square foot is sound. The 2 newer projects are getting around $1.35, $1.40 a foot, so that's good when you're looking at new construction. The second one is that the pipeline that we went over is daunting, frankly, in Gwinnett County. There are 15 projects under construction and another 6 proposed, and that doesn't even account for the 800 units that are proposed in downtown Loganville. And again, that includes market rate apartments as well as active adult apartments. You know, if anybody in here is curious, I guess, as to why the recent activity, a lot of what we've noticed is that a lot of these developers were largely focused in the urban core and in town Atlanta, and as costs have risen from a construction and land standpoint, as well as just the market getting a little overbuilt and in town Atlanta, a lot of the developers are starting to flock to the suburbs to find sites where they can build product, where they're not having to do structured parking, and where there just hasn't been as much supply delivered to the market. So if anyone in here is curious as to why it's a more recent phenomenon, that's what's kind of taken place. But there's also pent-up demand because so much of the energy has been focused in town. There hasn't been a lot of supply recently delivered in the suburbs. So a little bit of it's catch up, and a little bit of it is you know, just chasing opportunity, frankly. That's what developers do. The third bullet is just talking to Loganville's low population density and lack of job concentration. In our opinion, it raises a little bit of question about the depth of apartment demand. However, with the strong population growth, and as you can see with the map, the fact that momentum is heading eastward in Gwinnett County, we see that as a positive thing. Getting back to the retail, we don't need to dwell too much on that, but the retail is sound. Happy to answer any questions about that afterwards. The last finding is that it's shown in other comparable communities in Gwinnett County. Downtown revitalization doesn't happen overnight, and we heard that almost with every community we talked to. We've done a lot of work recently in Fayetteville, Georgia, and it's a gradual thing. And so, in our humble opinion, it's not something that you just dive into and make a big splash overnight. Not to say that that's what this developer's contemplating, but nonetheless, that's just how we view things. In terms of conclusions, downtown Loganville is not a natural location for Class A apartment development, but momentum's heading that way. The pipeline's full, and most developments are closer to major job centers than downtown. In our mind, the proposed active adult community will likely compete with the market rate product. You know, you talk to some people, and they would say that they're 2 totally different product types because they're targeting different markets. But in our mind, those kind of empty nesters, retirees are the same potential renters that would be looking to rent in the standard apartment project as would be renting in the active adult project. In our mind, it would not be prudent for both communities to deliver at the same time. Talking about the 300 units on the City Hall property and the 200 units closer to 78. All that said, we think the city should make a concerted effort to focus as much development along Main Street corridor as possible. Given the healthy retail market, there's an opportunity for downtown to offer something unique that's not currently in the area. And we think the retail development should be phased with roughly 15,000 to 20,000 square feet. All right, down to the recommendation. We think the city should pursue an apartment development on the City Hall property, but should refrain from granting zoning for the other 2 multifamily sites. Based on the success of that initial development, the city should then reassess the apartment opportunities on the other sites. The city should request more information to address the need for incentives, but should be open to financial assistance in order to ensure that it's a quality product. And if the city is committed to enhancing its downtown, it should make a serious effort to work with Conway because he's a reputable firm with a strong track record. But, you know, again, we've worked with a handful of downtowns in the last couple of years. And not only in working with those, but in talking with all these other ones, if the community is committed to kind of re-energizing and revitalizing the downtown and the city as a whole, you know, you need some apartments to fuel that. And not only to fuel just the energy of the city, but to fuel new potential retail. But in our mind, that doesn't mean that you need 800 units overnight. So we think it should be a phased approach and one that, you know, not a wait and see, but you see how the first project does and you take it from there, and not baby steps, but incremental steps. So from there, you might want to just focus on the plan in case anybody has questions about that. But happy to take any questions from the council and I guess from the public as well.
I have a clear,
Go ahead. Yeah, any questions from the council? And then, yes, I will open it up to the public. But Robin Webb is going to keep time 3 minutes. I do understand. I just want questions for the topic that's being discussed. Okay? So when you do ask your questions, like regular city council meeting, stand up, state your name, and then answer questions. Okay? Go ahead.
when you're talking about occupancy rates, on the apartment side, you're talking about the number of units, but on the retail, you're talking about percentage of square feet. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then on the apartments, even with the constructed ones that are under construction, that look like they're at 6%, 6% and 20%, even with those in the mix, we're at 95%?
No.
Right?
No.
Because they're listed there, that's why I'm asking.
Yes, and there should be a note at the bottom that clarifies that. If you want to go to
That's not
this
included.
slide,
I see it.
we produce an in-town Atlanta apartment report that a lot of people subscribe to, and I guess through doing that, you know, I guess everybody has their own opinions of how you look at it, but it's not a true reflection of the market. If you have something that delivered last month and is almost 0% occupied, to say that's what the occupancy rate is in the market. So what we do is we net out anything that is an initial lease up. An initial lease up is defined as projects that are leasing units until they reach that 95% metric. So that 95.4% does not include the two projects that have the asterisk by them, number 4 and number 7.
And then one other question, why do you look at senior interest in apartments or senior living as the same as like non-senior? It seems to me those are two different groups of people. Why are they lumped together?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think if this was a denser market, you know, if we were in Kennesaw or Duluth or closer in town where you had a denser population, where you're seeing more of that senior product be built, I think you could argue that it is two different demand pools. But when you look at, I guess, the potential renters, first of all, just the population makeup of Loganville and the surrounding area, but then the potential renters that might be renting at the market rate units. And if you believe that some of that is going to be coming from the older population, then I think you make that argument. If you're going to say, well, this is just going to target millennials or young adults, young professionals, then that might not be the case. But in our mind, again, everyone's subject to their own opinion, but we talked to a fair amount of developers during this process, and some of them have looked at this opportunity, and whenever we work on an assignment, our belief is that you learn the market, do those in the market. So we don't operate in a vacuum, and we talk to as many people as possible to put it in front of them and get their insight. And we heard that from some developers too, is that they thought there would be crossover from a demand standpoint.
Why do you think Loganville Commons, it's why their occupancy rate is lower than the other ones? Why would you think that? It seems like the price per square feet is about lower than Same program, why do you think?
Yeah, that's the Dick's Sporting Goods anchored property. Well, my understanding is a few years ago, it really struggled, and that it was bought by a new group that has re-injected some life into it. But when you look at the site plan of the property, you guys can find that online if you're curious. You know, centers have smaller boxes and bigger boxes, and they have a few large vacant big box spaces. And so that's just attributing to more of the vacancy, versus if their smaller shops were more vacant, the vacancy wouldn't be as high. But it's interesting because I'm talking to the leasing agent there, I guess two things. That was one answer, and secondly, he's like, frankly, this property is apples and oranges compared to what you'd be looking at in downtown Loganville from a retail opportunity standpoint. Because again, here you'd be targeting a Hobby Lobby to fill that box or something like that, and you're not going to be putting a Hobby Lobby in some of the retail that's proposed downtown. So I don't know if that answered your question, but the greater vacancy rate is largely due to some of the big box space that's empty.
Yeah. Danny?
Yes, I got one question. There's a rumor mill going around that Dick's Sporting Goods will close at the end of the lease.
That's not good.
I know it's not good, but I don't, that's all I know. You not heard that?
I have not. I didn't ask, but I have not heard that. That would create a larger void in that center.
But to your point earlier, what's going in that area would not be anything like what we're talking about doing retail-wise downtown.
That's correct. I mean, my understanding, and we met with Connolly and his team during this process, is that the type of retail they're talking about downtown is largely centered around restaurants and smaller shops. They're not going and trying to get a Target or anything like that to go downtown. They're trying to get more, I guess you could call it experiential retail, you know, that energizes the downtown, and that is something new and fresh to the area. And I think that they would like to bring in concepts in terms of restaurants that aren't currently available in the area. And in our mind, you know, he's the one that's taking that risk. So if he's willing to take that risk and go out on a limb to bring those retailers, you should welcome it, and more power to them. And the other thing is, from a retail standpoint, you know, for apartments, it's arguably a much more speculative endeavor, because you're building the units not knowing whether or not they're going to be filled. With retail, in today's world, especially after the last downturn, you can't go and build 50,000 square feet without having a lot of pre-lease commitments from tenants. So I think he will take a very systematic approach and not break ground on certain aspects of it without having significant commitments from tenants.
Any other questions from the council? Deb?
So there's other properties around the city that are already zoned for apartments. Would that factor into what you reported on?
No, we didn't look at any other property around the city. We really just focused on the plan as it was presented to us and what was being discussed.
Any other questions from the council?
I also understand that you made a point that this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time to put all this in place. And retail, the residential part will be built slowly, and as they fill up, then more will be added. So it's not going to, we're not going to build every apartment. I mean.
Our recommendation is that you take that approach.
Yeah.
Because if you grant that approval, then it could, you know, you never know. I mean, you know, it's basically saying if you zone it all, then you're leaving it to the market to dictate how quickly it gets built. And all we're saying is you might want to take a more cautious approach.
Thank you so much. I got a couple of questions just for the record. This is an independent study, is that correct?
Yes.
Lance?
Yes.
You don't have you guys don't have any property in the overlay district of Main Street, nothing to gain from this, nothing to lose from this, from any council members of Loganville, and even the mayor of Loganville has contacted you about this project before today.
No, other than our initial kind of kickoff meeting when you guys were considering whether or not to hire us to do the study. That was it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One more question too. You said, or I just want to make sure I understand, you said in your conclusions that it's not a natural location for a Class A apartment development, and I guess I missed what that definition is.
Well, I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but getting back to population density and job concentration, it wouldn't be a natural, like, where someone would say, hey, that's a slam dunk for an apartment project. That said, in our opinion, again, we don't think that the city should take the approach of just closing its doors and saying we're not open for business in terms of apartment development, because then you're going to get skipped over, and you know, groups just aren't going to look at you in the future. And I think that if you're serious about reinvigorating the city and the downtown, apartments need to be a component of it. And again, that's why we looked at these other cities in Gwinnett County to profile them. So you can't be closed-minded about it, but you want to be smart about it too, and take a prudent approach. But to answer your question, if you were to just kind of look at it on paper, it's not a slam dunk apartment site, but that's also why you're starting to see apartments trickle this way, but it's why you're seeing more of it concentrated along the 85 and 316 corridor in Gwinnett County.
Kind of piggybacking off of Bill's question, when you're saying, I know what Class A means, so are you saying that the Connolly proposal at the level of luxury apartments that he is stating, would you equate that to Class A, and you're concerned that that's too high end of an apartment? Are you drawing that conclusion?
No, I mean, I think the more quality the project is, the better.
Okay.
But there's a limit to the supply. But yes, it would be Class A in nature, and it would be top of the market rents in terms of what you see in the survey. I mean, it would. Yeah, Croft House at Grayson, if anybody's been by that, that's a good example of a Class A apartment. Class A takes a different definition depending on where you are. You know, if you're in Midtown Atlanta, that's different from out here from a rent standpoint. But you would not factor in affordable housing units or Section 8 housing or anything like that. So just pure market rate apartments.
Did your study either confirm or deny that you think that the kind of apartments at the price point that he is wanting to do it is doable? Did you draw a conclusion in that way? That the rents are astronomical for this area, or do you?
I don't think it's unrealistic.
Okay.
No. You know, that's part of the risk of being a developer is going and doing that and taking the chance. But the assumptions that they're making are not out of line. If they were to come in and say, we're going to do a structured parking deal and we need $2 a foot to make the rents work, and the Croft House is getting $1.40 a foot, well, that's a big spread. But what they're talking about is not out of line with what the market is right now.
Okay, and can you speak to one other concern that we've heard is that, if let's say we build 200 apartments, whatever, we do this proposal, and we have all of these high-end market rents that aren't rented. And there's a big fear that they'll sit into or they'll go to low rent apartments. How in other areas that we have seen, how is that managed? I mean, obviously the developer doesn't want to build something that's not going to fill because the neighbor's money. But if a complex sits vacant for a while, what happens to this? Because I don't know, and I think there's a lot of concern in the public. If you build units that are occupied, what happens?
There's not much precedent for that, frankly. I mean, there's not many examples you can point to where that's happened. What would happen is they lower the rent incrementally to fill the units, you know, because ultimately it's supply and demand and they're competing with the rest of the projects. But, I mean, you look at what's out there right now, and I don't think there's a fear that all of a sudden, instead of them getting $1.40 a foot in rent, they're gonna get 80 cents a foot in rent, and it's gonna become a slum. It's just not going to happen. You know, a lot of if you look back at the last cycle, and I think what some people think of when they think of a bunch of empty buildings is the condominium crash, and that was different because during the condo crash, you know, they truly had to sell those units. They couldn't go and rent them. So when you drove by and you saw a bunch of dark units and just vacancy, it was more driven from that than the apartment product, and the apartment cycle is just a little bit different.
Ladson, can you say for the audience, and of course I asked this first time we talked with council, is without apartments, this development doesn't happen. That's the biggest question that we get is why do we want apartments? It's not to say that we want them, it's to say it's a functional component of this entire development. Without apartments, without residential, this does not happen, period.
Well, ultimately, you know, Connolly has to go out and convince retailers to come to the project, and having apartments as a component of the development is a carrot that he goes out to use to lure those retailers. So I can't answer that for him, whether or not the development happens without the apartments. But apartments, you know, energize an area. They give kind of a 24-hour presence that the downtown area doesn't have right now. And they certainly support retail more so than if they weren't there. So it is a benefit in terms of luring the type of retailers that I think the city would hope to get downtown.
Can you, I'm sorry, Chris, can you use the microphone? I was going to say, go ahead. If you're serious about downtown revitalization, apartments are a key ingredient in all these other downtowns where they're having some success.
Did your study look at, I think in the proposal there's some townhouses or some family purchase homes. Did you look at that at all?
We did, not in great detail, but we did look at some of it, and we pulled some. We didn't want to overload everyone with too many charts, and we can provide that in the final report. We looked at just some townhome sales in the area and everything. There's likely a market for townhomes. Ultimately, I think the developers are going to speak to that, what kind of market there is. You know, that another kind of emerging product is rental townhomes. And I know people hear rental, they carry a certain stigma with it. But again, there's for sale townhomes and there's rental townhomes, and that could be another avenue for that kind of northeast quadrant where the track is right now, right over here, is potentially a rental townhome product instead of for sale. But again, we didn't talk to too many townhome developers. We really wanted to focus more on apartments and retail because we knew those were the hot button issues and the large majority of the proposed development.
Danny, Linda?
I got one more. I'm sorry. One of the things that the proposal that's kind of out there is that these sorts of rentals, the apartments that he's proposing, do not have children in them, that they are mostly single professionals or married professionals. In your experience, is that a true statement? Do you think that these are marketed for families with no, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I'm just asking. I don't know why you're smiling.
Well, I'm smiling because that's an impossible question to answer. I mean, you just don't know. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't want to answer that. It depends.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Danny, do you have any?
I got one. In your analysis, did you come up with some sort of number of apartments that would be feasible for this development?
our mind is 300. Yeah, we think what's being discussed right now on the City Hall property and the adjoining properties is a realistic, doable number. You know, when apartment developers are looking for a product, they're looking for that kind of 250 to 350 units. That is an efficient number for them from an operating standpoint. So to come back and say, well, we only want to see 100 or 150 apartments, that's not very realistic to ask from the development community.
And with 300 or 250, what would you say the need for square footage of resale space?
We think starting at least around 15 to 20,000 square feet. And I think another important thing that we didn't mention in the text, but is worth noting, is what you don't want is for the apartments to break ground and the retail to not. You know, there needs to be some concurrency to it so that you can ensure that the retail delivers along with the apartments. But you don't need 50,000 square feet of retail right out of the gate. Well,
Would that number 300 change if you factored in, you mentioned you did look at the other apartments in the area, like a couple miles from here, there's going to be about 300 apartments, is that correct?
are you talking about the one that Lennar has proposed on 78?
Would that number go down, that 300 that you just mentioned, if you factored in the 300?
No, we factored that into it. Again, we think that it's not too big of a stretch to say that downtown Loganville, especially with the retail that would come along with it, because you got to remember that the two go hand in hand, and if you have all that retail right outside the door from the apartments, that enhances the appeal of the apartments. For instance, Croft House and the Lennar deal and everything else, those are on a little bit more of an island than what you're talking about here. And if you have that kind of walkable downtown vibe to it, where people can walk out the door and go to a restaurant, that enhances the appeal for the apartments. So there is a competitive advantage for whatever proposed apartments would be downtown compared to some of the pure product that's going up, you know, nearby.
I think you, on those, what you're recommending, you say in the track will be the ideal place, is that?
Well, the way it's drawn right now, the townhomes are where the track is, and the apartments are on top of where we are right now, as well as some of the single-family homes that line, I'm sorry, what street is that? Fair Street, yeah, along Fair Street. So, you know, what they have drawn with the apartments on A1, the city doesn't own all of that, but our understanding is that Connolly has some of that land under contract as well. So yes, basically, everything that's shown in that top right, and keep in mind, of course, I mean, this is a plan that will change. This is not going to be the end-all be-all. I can pretty much guarantee that. So I'm sure based on whatever comes out of this meeting, Connolly may then go back to the drawing boards and shift some of the plan a little bit. But I guess what we're saying is a 300-unit apartment community on this site with an initial wave of retail is a sensible number. And townhomes would be great too. I think that just, you know, that remains to be seen how they want to reconfigure the site accordingly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Danny? No questions? All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience. I know we got questions up. Robin's going to keep time. Okay, 3 minutes. Ask your questions. Go from there. All right, stand up and state your name.
So Mayor,
Yes.
can we pass the microphone so everyone?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Hey, yeah, here. Hey, my name is Dustin Vos. Yeah, I live on Old Zion Wood, so I'm right next to all this construction. So my question is, in 2017, there was that weekly report. It said that 167. Okay, thanks. Yeah, it was saying that it was 167 apartments that were not viable due to absorption rates. So 2020, I'm just trying to see what the difference is from what you guys reported 300 might be viable. And also, there's a lot of buzz about other main streets around here, like Monroe, that is more like an historical version that doesn't have apartments. So I was trying to see what the difference is in this location versus that one is. So those are kind of my two questions.
I didn't totally understand the Monroe question.
There's just a lot of people trying to compare it. Monroe has a historical district that doesn't have apartments on Main Street, and they have a lot of viable retail space. So people are comparing it to what's on here, and they're trying to see if something like that would be more viable here versus the apartments.
Gotcha. Well, I guess to address that first, yeah, the nice thing is, while it is arguably in need of some reinvestment, you have a little bit of that historic stretch right now. And the nice thing about Main Street is it's a pretty tight corridor in terms of length. I mean, what you don't want is too long of a distance because you lose kind of that synergy. So the fact that Main Street doesn't stretch too far, we think is a good thing, and we think that the new retail and the apartments will hopefully re-enliven the older product to the west and spur some reinvestment there. Sorry, I'm trying to the weekly study. Yeah, you know, that was focused on one site within the downtown. And what they looked at was the feasibility of what you could build on that project or on that site. And they also looked at structured parking. You know, the thing is, once you get to too many, if you got, what was it, Chris, a 3-acre site, 3.8 acre site, the costs start to get to a point where if you try to do 250, 300 units on a 3-acre site, it's just not feasible in the area. So my guess is, we didn't talk to Bleakley during this analysis, but that they said there's a limit based on the type of product that you can build on that site, if that makes sense.
At that time, the stuff wasn't going on in downtown Lawrenceville, which has been absorbed very well. There wasn't as much activity sort of moving this way. So I think it was, at that point in time, felt like it was more on an island out here.
Thank you, Chris. Any other questions? Yes, yes.
Don Walker. I appreciate the fact that you're talking about phasing it in as we need it, as it grows. But why would you start by tearing this building down and building a new city hall? Why not go a little bit farther out and start there instead of tearing the building down? We just spent $1 million on it.
I'm going to leave that to the council to address.
Let's have questions about this development. We'll answer your questions, Don. We will. Let's, what he talked about, let's ask the questions about the Haddow report. Go ahead,
Do we answer it now?
Go ahead, Danny. Go ahead.
This property was bought for redevelopment. Contrary to what people are saying on Facebook, we bought this in 2016 for redevelopment because every developer we talked to from 2015 up till now said, this 3.8 acres you have is nice, but what about the 10 acres over here? So it's a bigger land use because the reason the city bought it was to be able to buy, obtain it, and control it for what the city thought was great for the community. That's why we bought it. Yeah, we did spend $1.3 million on the building, but when the city redevelops it, if they choose to do so, trust me, we will get our money back plus some. So we bought this for redevelopment. I'm sorry, sorry.
How much time does Don have? Okay, go ahead, Don.
So then, we're going to have to build a new city hall. Why didn't we do it in the first place instead of spending $1 million here?
Like I said, to control who bought this land. So if you own the land, you control the land. If we didn't buy it and some other developer bought it, then he could do whatever he wanted to as long as the zoning was met.
Thank you.
I would say if we built a new city hall prior to selling this property, y'all would really be mad because taxes would have to go up. We're trying to do that without a tax increase. This property we sit on is very valuable.
Thank you, Danny. I think, ma'am, you had a, go ahead. Yes. You got microphones coming.
My name is Erin. I've got a couple of questions. Most are just to clarify some statements that I made in my interpretation of what you said. One is just to revisit the Monroe issue that you kind of heard some scuttlebutt about. You stated that it's mandatory for revitalization of our main street that these apartments have to come in. When you were coming to that conclusion, did you evaluate what has taken place in the development and revitalization of the Monroe historic downtown area who did not add apartments? So was that taken into consideration when you made the determination that we had to have apartments for it to be successful here? The second question that I had, or clarification, was you had made mention about the significant development from Atlanta coming this way and how developed it is, so much so that now developers are to keep on moving that engine forward, they're coming further out and basically developing small town areas. I just want to clarify, and you said they're chasing development. So basically, they're just keep churning and moving out, correct?
That is the life of a developer. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, they don't get paid without building products, so they're trying to find areas of opportunity, but they wouldn't be looking here if they didn't think that there was an opportunity.
So they want to push to develop. Okay. And your thoughts on what I stated about Monroe?
We did not look at Monroe. You know, what we did, we reacted to this plan. So the notion was, is this plan feasible? Is this plan doable? And if so, what's the appropriate scale? So we weren't saying, in our mind, we think it is feasible. If we didn't think so, we would say don't do any of it. But the question wasn't, or our question tasked to us was not, well, should we do this or should we just reinvest in the existing retail? It's what's the feasibility of the proposed plan.
And you're saying, without evaluating other areas that have not added apartments, that you're stating for our revitalization to take place, we would need apartments.
If the question is, does the new retail work without apartments, it's a harder sell to lure those retailers. Now, if you're just saying, let's reinvest in the retail we have, yeah, that's a different question altogether. But if it is, does the new retail as proposed in this development make sense or work without having any apartments added, I think that would be a tough thing to convince any developer and or retailer to come.
It would exist a few miles up the road.
Okay.
Just wanted to share. Okay, thank you so much for clarifying.
And excuse me, what was your last name?
Yeah, Mayor. Last name for the I think the city clerk.
Ma'am, it is required for you to provide your last name. It's not a statute. The mayor has conditionally opened the meeting to allow the public to speak. If anyone else would like to speak, the requirements for you to do so are to provide your first and last name.
And just let me add, Monroe does have apartments. They're building, I believe, 87 as we speak. If you're comparing Monroe, who's a county seat that has their downtown development for the last 30 years, 40 years. I mean, I'm 44, I was born and raised here, and they've had it ever since. So if you're comparing why is Loganville doing something that Monroe didn't do, it's not the same. Yeah, and that's my answer. So they are building apartments in Monroe. Right across the mill. Yeah.
All right, before we, Robbie, can you repeat that again for the audience that didn't hear?
You asked me for statutory authority. I will tell you that this meeting has been advertised in compliance with Georgia's open meetings law. There is no requirement that the mayor open it to the public at all. He has decided to do so to allow you all to comment and participate. In doing so, he's asked that you provide your first and last name so that we have an accurate record in the minutes. That is the requirement, and you will be asked to do that. So if you would like to comment or speak, please be advised that you will be asked to provide your first and last name for purposes of the minutes.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, right here in the front, sir.
I'm going to have to remain seated because I have a cargo issue.
No problem.
I would like to know, anybody in the city council.
Name and last name.
Bob Carter, I live in Loganville and I own my home, it's paid for. Or Marshville, or Duluth. We wouldn't have moved here if we did.
My name is Pam Hardy. My question is, says that we have 200 apartments, and it sounds like the retail's being focused on those 200 apartments. So I'd like to understand the availability for the 15,000 or 13,000 residents here. It's going to be enough parking for us to be able to get to this place and be able to park, to be able to use these restaurants. It really sounds like we're focusing on people that aren't here yet. I'd like this development to focus on people that are here. And I want to make sure that the roads are clear to get there. We know the roads are questionable, but we'd like to know if there's enough parking. And did you consider parking in there for the residents that are currently here? When you looked at their plan, is my question.
In terms of being able to park and shop at and dine at the retail establishment?
Yeah, to enjoy it just like the apartment residents can do. They can walk. We can't walk there. We'd like to be able to park there if we want to come to use these restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's frankly a next step, stage when it's been, and nothing's been approved yet, and that's something that will be negotiated between the developer and the city. But yes, you would want the parking requirements to allow for plenty of walkability and for the residents to come and enjoy the downtown.
That's something we really need to know and make sure that happens here, because we do want to be able to get there and park.
I agree.
It is for more than the apartment people, this is development.
Correct.
Yes, and the parking for the apartment complex would be exclusive to them, but there also is, I don't remember the exact number, Ron, do you remember? 150 additional parking just for retail. So our development regulation that we use for every shopping center or every apartment will be applied to this as well once we get to that phase. Right now, this is still a conceptual plan. That's what I want everybody to understand, because the rumor out there is they've already voted, they've already made a decision, and that's nothing but false information. Just get people stirred up. So, yes, once this project is voted on to move forward, then that will be the next step, is to let the developer follow the development regulations for the city of Loganville.
We understand what the developer's focused on. I mean, but I want to make sure in the plan we did consider the residents that are here as well. Because he's not focused on us at all. So we really make sure that is 150 enough, hopefully. But, you know, a lot of places in these new towns, you can't find a place to park. You go to Lawrenceville, you can't find a place to park.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Main Street now, there's like 9 parking spots on Main Street.
Right, exactly.
And the only parking that we have is owned by the city of Loganville, and we allow those retail people to park in our lot.
And when I go to Brazelton, I mean, there's a small town very much like Loganville. I mean, they've got a nice parking deck just for the residents to come live and enjoy the city. I'm just saying, I hope this development plan includes that. That's really kind of a question to you as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam, appreciate it. All the way in the back, I got the one standing up over there.
Yes. My name's Susan Evans, and I do live in the city of Loganville.
They can hear you.
Okay. Hi. My name is Susan Evans, and I do live in the city of Loganville. I want to go back to the proposed report that we're talking about today, and the number of apartments, to clarify. So what we've been hearing on Facebook and out in the public is that there's 800 apartments going in, okay? So am I clear that you are suggesting that we only start, or we only begin with 200 apartments and we scrap the 800 for now and do this in not baby steps, but to clarify, in progressive, would it only be your suggestion to approve 200 apartments, go from there, and then we'd have to go through this whole thing again to approve 200 or 300 more apartments to get to the 800? I want clarification on that.
Yes, the number's 300, but yes, the suggestion would be, the city can basically use zoning as a tool to command how much apartments are approved at any given time. And, they may want to look at some phased agreement or approach with the developer, but the notion being that, yes, currently you only allow for 300 apartments, and then you take a wait and see approach.
And just to follow up with that question, 800 is what's been asked for. Nothing has been decided. So when he did the DR, the Development Regional Impact to the Northeast Georgia Commission, that's what he has to show to get approval from the
So
state.
you guys asked for 800?
No, the
On the
development,
council.
we have to submit the developer's plan to the state. Just like if it was another plan that didn't include Main Street, say no developer came and wanted to build something this size, we would have to send it through to the Northeast Georgia for their review, because it impacts other governments besides the city of Loganville. So once we get the comment back from the state, then the city council will take this information, that information, and come up with a determining factor of what do we think is viable as far as number. Will it be 300? Will it be 200? Will it be 800? That's the decision that they will make, but 800 is just what they put down on paper.
To request.
That the developer put on paper, not the city of Loganville. The developer has asked for 800. Tax money will not be used to build apartments nor retail. That's another false narrative out on Facebook is 800 approved, your tax money's going towards that. That's nothing but false information. This is still a conceptual plan that the developer proposed to the city of Loganville to be submitted to the state of Georgia for review.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Thank you, ma'am. All right, all the way in the back, sir, since we're already there. Oh, yes.
Hello, I'm Michael Barron. I live a mile from here, right off Tommy Lee Fuller, that feeds out into the intersection of 78 and 20. That's where our bottleneck is right now, traffic-wise. I've ridden the DOT on several occasions, and they have repeatedly told me there's no plans for any improvements in the highways until 2024. That's when the funding is. When it's actually completed, I think it's going to be at least several months, probably a year. What my question is, has this study looked at the interim between the first apartments going up in 2020 and this 5-year span in between, as to what effect it's going to have on us for that 5-year period, trying to get out onto Highway 20 from Tommy Lee Fuller, right where this terrible bottleneck is that feeds right into Main Street?
No, we're not traffic engineers. That would be a totally different kind of analysis.
Yeah, Michael, that will be a question. Like I said, this is what he talked about, the Haddow, the development. He's not a GDOT, and that's a question for the GDOT, basically. All right?
But the traffic study is on our website that was just submitted from AR Engineering.
By Connolly, paid for by Connolly.
AR Engineering, yes.
Paid for by Connolly.
They commissioned that study.
Connolly funded study.
And that DRI report, correct me if I'm wrong, it is coming out in about a week or so, or longer. That DRI report will be coming out soon, so that would be some of the questions.
Mayor, excuse me, can I say something real quick? To the lady back there that addressed 800 apartments, this was never a number that the city council came up with. Never. And not one city council member, including myself, has ever said that they support 800 units. Not one. We have never said that.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny. All right, and right here, the sure. Yes, sir.
She's been ordering up for a while.
Yes, my name is Judy Camp, and you just answered part of my question. I was wondering if in your study, did it consider the crowding of our schools, the infrastructure, and the traffic?
No.
Thank you.
Add on to that answer. The traffic, the schools, and the infrastructure all come into play when the city makes a decision on the zoning and approving the development. All of those things will be studied by Tim Prater and his office. None of that will be ignored by the council as they consider this development. Again, no decisions have been made, and it won't be approved or denied until those issues are specifically fleshed out and addressed by the council.
Okay, and I understand, I appreciate you saying that, but it almost seems like you are before.
This is just the initial conceptual plan. It's what Conley, sometimes you ask for the moon and then you negotiate from there. This is what he has asked for. This is not what the city has agreed to.
Thank you. I'm going to Linda Duff, council member. Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. You're in the middle.
My name is Dana Dance, and I had a question, and first I want to say I appreciate the fact that you're letting people speak. And it is a hot issue with everybody, it's all a buzz, and I think the best thing for everybody to do is be calm. And it would be great if citizens and y'all could have an actual discussion on what we plan for the future. My one question with this is, and I don't live in the city limits, I live down off of 81, but it affects everybody that lives in the area. And my question is, everybody, you know, it was a big issue because it's like 800 apartments. Oh my God, are they crazy? I don't want high-rise eyesores, and you don't want all of this type of thing. So now when we come to the meeting, it's like, well, let's just start with 200. So it kind of calms everybody, like, well, we really don't like that, but 200, but you're not mentioning all these other apartments. Like, you're talking about putting ones off of in different areas around downtown. So where you're saying, oh, well, it's kind of common, it's what it feels like to me, like, well, it's common because, you know, it's not 800, it's only this much, but you're putting them all over the place. Around, like, there's, am I not correct, there's other projects being started for apartments that are not specifically in downtown, but around the area. So it's still gonna, we're still having more apartments. So you're not, like, really, even if you only put 200 there, they're trying to put 200 here, or there's a like some kind of project right off of what, Tommy Lee Fuller or something like that. So the numbers aren't real that it's presenting to us, is what I feel like.
Well, the pipeline exhibit was an effort to capture what is being planned and proposed and under construction in the area. So we did take all that into account when we came back to our conclusion about the 300.
It's just right there. Even though it's not in this square area of development that's in the study, it's still just right there. So even if you only do 200 and you're having these projects here and over there, it's way more than what it, do you understand what I'm saying? It's way more as far as cars and how, I mean, I understand what you're saying is it's a developmental thing, but I think we need to like take the study into consideration. I think there should have been more for surrounding areas. And I know what you're saying for commission, just to see if this was viable for this piece of land. That's what you focused on. But we really need to focus on the surrounding area. And I know that he wants to come out here and they want to, you know, he needs this. Oh, my mother told me she lives in Jackson County. They do the same type of thing. The developers come out there and, oh, if you let us put up all these apartments and this retail space, we'll build you a new city hall and a new police department and a new library. That we don't need any of that anyway. You know, if you let us do this, and that's what I feel like it is. You know, I don't feel like we really need, like, I think we need to find out what we really want for this area. What are the positives of doing this? Is it that we need money for something, or what is going to be the big positive come out of the community for a whole? You know, and the reason why people are going back and forth is because they don't want to live in Lawrenceville or Snell. I hate going to Snellville. It's awful. You know, that's why they're even where it's peaceful and quiet.
My apologies, but your time is
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Dana, I want to, I think, speak to something that you didn't say, but maybe that you meant. I want to check it out with you. I think what you said was that the council may use the 200 that he's saying now to sneak in another 200, another, and that is, I waited for this report. Well, I know, but that somehow we want to get the whole 800. Okay. Okay, I'm glad.
I'm just thinking, I don't think we're considering it, but it does make me feel better to a certain aspect, because sometimes I feel like it's not within our control anyway, to have this instead of that. But at the same time, this doesn't make me feel better if this is going up here and that's going up there.
Right.
It's just spread out and not so much right there.
Well, and Ladson, to clarify what you said earlier, you guys looked at all of the apartments being built to give us the 250 to 300 number, and, is that right first?
Correct.
And then I think you also said that it's hard to compare a downtown development to standalone island apartments that don't have the additional benefits like retail, because those are a different animal than what we're talking about downtown, is that right as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think her comment is different and not one that I think is aimed towards me, but it's really the question of factoring in all the stuff that's proposed in conjunction with what's downtown is, and when is enough. That, I think that was her question, but it doesn't have as much to do with the merit of 250 to 300 units downtown. So I think it's just two different questions.
Thank you. Anybody else? We got, go ahead, sir.
Got you next. I'll sing you.
My name is Dana Russell. I just have one quick question I wanted to ask, and then ask you to comment on whether my thought process is appropriate or not. So I think I heard you say that the developer, any developer, would want to have strong commitments to the retail before they started building, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that means that retail really has to go up first or at the same time as the apartments, because he certainly wouldn't want to start the apartments without having commitments to the retail part.
And that would be our suggestion, yes.
So if it's logical, we're not going to get apartments with no retail.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dad.
I got one back here.
Oh, go ahead.
My name is Barry Ford. The proposal and everything that's being mentioned, you know, with the land and all that, you know, am I understanding that before they can come in here and put the 3, 5, or whatever number that, you know, that they come with as far as apartments, does the developer purchase all the property up front so that he or she later then can come in and do it, or would that have to be negotiated again time and time after each phase is done?
That's their prerogative. I mean, if they want to buy property, they can buy it, but if they don't have the zoning, then they can't do what they want to do.
Okay.
So they can buy it if they want to.
Okay. All right, part two of this, the second question that I had is, I'm sitting here looking at all this, but not one thing has been mentioned. We go and put all these buildings up and we cover the ground with the asphalts and concretes. Where does the runoff go to? Because I live at the bottom of the hill right down here on Holly Court, and Little Haynes Creek is a raging river now when it rains. So we're going to get all this extra down there, and the city, some of y'all may have already been out and looked behind the properties down there. I've got 50 and 60-year-old trees in my yard and even up down the creek that used to you could walk between them and the creek. Now they're leaning and fixing to fall into the creek. It's to that point now, that just with the rains that we have now. And every time you cover the ground, I know you've got tension ponds, but you can't stop water, it's got to go somewhere. Has any of that been looked at and evaluated?
I'll leave that one to
That will
Danny.
be reviewed if this project is approved even, rival, their developer will have to civil engineer it and it'll have to go through the city, for their engineer to approve it.
Okay.
That will come once
Well,
it's.
I mean, I know each thing is a phase, but I haven't heard any of that mentioned. And,
Right.
You know, I'm the bucket that it falls into up and down that creek there, and, you know, the creeks are rising, literally. That pretty much sums up what I had to ask. Well, and the historical part of it, how would that phase, you know, or be intertwined with this development here?
In terms of the historic retail that's already there,
Right.
it's
A facelift is one thing, but tear it down and, you know, just start from the ground up, that takes away the, you know, the.
no, I don't think that's the plan. I mean,
We're not-
what they're talking about is doesn't contain hardly any of the historical retail.
Right.
And ultimately, you know, it's largely up to the property owners to reinvest in their property, or for the city to provide certain incentives for them to upgrade the facades. But the hope is that, you know, as the momentum builds along Main Street, that the historical part gets reinvested in as well. But no, this didn't take into consideration tearing down that retail section.
Right. And the traffic flow has been mentioned a little bit. I know that's going to further bottleneck, you know, Main Street, and it's horrible now. But that would be funding with the state that would comply with the city as far as those, when that time comes?
Well, one of the things in the market study was to try to get rid of the state designation for Main Street. And if that happened, then we'd have a little bit more control over what happens on Main Street. Right now, everything has to be approved by the state of Georgia, which takes a lot of time. So we got to wait until we meet with the state to see if they're willing to get rid of that designation for Main Street.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and just to piggyback on what Lance said, yeah, this project does not include any historical. Go ahead, sir. Go. Right there.
Hey, my name's Kerry Owen. I live here in Loganville, the city limits. My question is, on some of those blocks that you mentioned, right, like the track, the football field behind the city hall, That's gonna be turned into somewhat of an amphitheater, or I guess y'all said kind of like a little green space we have down here. But that road that runs along there that has all those historical neighborhoods, Pecan Street and all that, is any of that gonna be affected during this growth going backwards from Main Street towards the Mason Lodge and all that kind of stuff back there? Is any of that development going back into those historical neighborhoods?
I guess I'm turned around a little bit because where the track is not where the amphitheater is being discussed. But maybe we're talking about two different things. Are you talking about the track on the school property?
Yeah, the old football field right here from the middle school.
Yeah,
And
that's-
the next road right there, that's a major intersection.
Right.
And it's kind of a cut through, and then the next road down is even a cut through, because everybody that, lives around here, we know the little back roads. But once everybody else finds those back roads, it's just gonna get worse and worse and worse, just as much as Main Street is with the tractor trailers going through it. Because it's a Georgia highway, it's 20. I'm retired out of a place that had CDL trucks, and that's how they have to go through this town. And they're going through a 2-lane road. If they start going, everybody else is dodging around back into those historical areas, is any of this growth being projected back into those back neighborhoods?
Not on the current plan, no.
And my second question is, like, if Conley purchases, and we just start off on the baby steps with the 200, if he purchases this land to put the other ones in, and like the man said at the end, once you own, like this city hall, you have the rights to it. If he owns that, who's to say he can't come in and develop whatever he wants to later on while we're still doing baby steps?
Oh, he wouldn't have the zoning approval, I guess is what we're saying, is that you wouldn't grant the zoning approval beyond the 300 units. So he may own the property, but he can't do what he would want to do because he wouldn't have the right to do it.
Well, what would he be buying them in as? Whatever they were zoned in? So he's not gonna come in and buy all this land at once and then say, I own it? And we're just gonna see how the first 200 or 300 work?
Well, again, that's his prerogative. I mean, if he wants to go and buy land, he's then essentially speculating on it. And, with the hope that maybe he can do something with it in the future, or that the value just escalates. But that just because he buys it doesn't mean he can go and develop it.
We just bought this place, we have the rights to it, is what he said right there. Once you own the land, you can do whatever you want. And yeah, it has to be zoned in, that's true. But who's to say later on that he can, say, I'm gonna start developing it and put it in different classes, like adult living or senior citizens living or anything like that. The main thing is, it's just adding more growth to a town that leads to all the traffic and interstructural that we're talking about.
Sir, your time is up.
Thanks, Terry. Can I respond, Danny? Mr. Owen, like they said before, he can buy whatever he wants to, but it has to be rezoned for whatever he wants to do to it. That would be these people up here to rezone it. If we saw not to do that, then he'd just be stuck with the property. Thanks, Sarah.
And also, Danny, you may be able to speak to this better. The council doesn't approve the number of apartments. We don't say, okay, 800 apartments are fine, 400 apartments are fine, 100. We control the land by zoning the density of the housing that's allowed on it. So we don't, the question before the council is not, are we going to allow 800 apartments? The question is, and why the Haddow study is done, is what will the downtown hold, what will it support, and then we control what happens based on how the land is zoned and its density. And that is why we're here. So we can't say, okay, we want 800 apartments. We have to say that we will allow this kind of housing at this many units per acre, right? So that's why we're here, is to talk about zoning. And to your question, he can't build apartments if it's not zoned that way. And that's what we control, is what can be built somewhere, okay?
Good. Terry, are you?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if all that land that he's projected, is it already zoned for apartments?
No.
It's not, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. My name is Bob Champlin. I live a block outside the city limits. I've just moved up here a year and a half ago, so I'm not up to speed with everything, but I don't quite understand the purpose to begin with everything that's being done. Everybody talks about revitalizing the town. I didn't know that there was a problem with it. Is the whole purpose behind this to get more tax base and more tax dollars and make a bigger wheel? I mean, we're on a smaller wheel now, so we're just gonna make it a larger wheel? So you're gonna have more people and a bigger city? Is that what we're looking toward?
So in 2008, we offered it to the citizens of the urban redevelopment plan and saying, what do you want for the city? So we commissioned public groups, citizens to come in and say, what do you want your downtown to look? It was downtown Loganville, it was part of Highway 20 towards 78, and then we had like 5 or 6 different meetings with the public, not council, but people that live in the city that pay taxes, and said, what do you want to see in Loganville? And that was the first step in 2008. Since then, it has grown, but then the recession happened. So we commissioned that. We commissioned the LCI study, which is a Livable Centers Initiative. Thank you. And that was in 2010, and there was another one in 2015, and it all focused on redeveloping downtown Louisville. That was our mission. That was my mission as a city manager in 2017. Through y'all, to them, to me, is work on downtown Louisville. We got to redevelop downtown Louisville. So that's what I've been doing since 2017, is meeting with so many developers to try to make our downtown where people can come and enjoy it. But right now, there's no reason to come to downtown except for concerts, pay your taxes, go to church, and go get your hair cut at Braxton. So it was from the citizens to us to do this, and that's what we've been working on.
I just wondered why they wouldn't consider something like Monroe, because I've been over there, I really like that little city, their history in the city, and they seem to be able to support everything. But, like I say, I haven't been brought up to speed on this. I appreciate your input. Okay, very much.
Sir, I think, and to the lady before, when you compare us to Loganville, that's apples and oranges. There's no comparison. They've had the stores, they have the main street, and I love to go there. We don't have a main street. Keep that in mind. 9 stores, 9 parking slots. That's all we have.
Remember that the city of Monroe is a county seat.
Right.
Covington is a county seat of Newton County. And you can't compare us to a county seat. And I'm gonna quote what Mr. Latham said. If we don't do this, I'm just saying, we do or we don't, other cities are gonna skip us by. So we gotta do something. We gotta do something. Other cities gonna skip us by. So I don't know, but we have to do something. We have to do something. Because just like Danny said, the only reasons why people want to come downtown is for a concert, to get a haircut, and a few more things. So let's see what happens. I'm open to anything. Yes, all the way in the back, I think, Ms. Elliott, I think you spoke to you today, right? Go ahead.
So I hear y'all say that's what you want, but then when we come to the budget, you say, why are we paying so much? Well, what brought you to Loganville? Because most of y'all said, when I moved here, and that's one of my pet peeves is when people say, when I moved here, we should shut the city limits off now that you're in. What brought you here is the same reason it's bringing these other people here. They love Loganville. We want Loganville to grow. We don't want to be stagnant. If we're stagnant, we die. So my job is to promote. I'm sorry.
Let us speak. Let us speak.
My job is to promote the city of Loganville. I don't worry about what other cities doing. I worry about what the city of Loganville is doing. So I would encourage growth to come. Now, if the council says we're not growing, then we'll put a moratorium and everything stay the same as. And then, but our cost of service is going to continue to rise and rise and rise. So then we're going to have to tax the 12,000 people that we have here versus spread it over more people. If we don't do something, other retail passes by, restaurants passes by. How many people in this room say, gee, why can't we have something other than a chicken restaurant? Why can't we have something other than fast food? Right? This is part of it. You got to have a destination for businesses to come. And they look at rooftops, residential, and income for homes. If we just stop growing, guess what? We'll be another city that dies. But we're trying to do this because that's what's been told to us from the citizens. Now, I know some of y'all don't like apartments, and that's the biggest thing. Last council meeting, we want growth, we want retail, we just don't want apartments. Well, guess what? This developer is not gonna do it. Nor any other developer I said is gonna do it. So, we gotta be willing to give here and take there. That's what it is when it comes to our jobs.
Thank you, Danny. You will, oh, yeah, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Tricia Elliott, and I live within city limits. I live off of Tommy Lee Fuller. I do have a dog in some of this fight. We moved out here 22 years ago. We have seen massive explosions in traffic on our little antiquated roads. We want development. I know I do. If Connolly is not willing to come unless apartments are included with retail, then I say, why can't we work together and brainstorm for the community, not just for those who are going to squat in concrete over the retail? Make it reasonable and include amenities for the community. What happened to a dog park? Was that mentioned in your report to evaluate? What happened to that proposal? Something for everyone to enjoy. We want green space. We want functionality. We don't want high-rise concrete that blocks the sun. We want to be able to enjoy Main Street. It's difficult now to navigate it. And yes, there's little to nothing there. We want our historical buildings. I love history. The big yellow house over here behind my sister's antiques, it was built in the 1800s. Priceless. That's sad to bulldoze something of that historical value. Make it a touring house. Fix it up. Put in furniture of that era. Make it a touring home where you make money off of it instead of knocking it down. Include things that include the community. Was that in any of the report that you evaluated? Is there anything in that report for those of us who live here other than just more concrete?
Well, yes, not to get too deep in the weeds on that question, but if you look at the amphitheater that's proposed, I would imagine that would be for the benefit of the community, and that's what's being planned if the city hall is torn down.
And let me answer your question. Yes, dog park is being looked to be designed at the library property. The amphitheater is looking to expand. The current amphitheater we have will be another park. And to speak to your comment about the yellow house, I commend Mr. Connolly. He tried to buy that house to sell to the city to make it a historical society as a home. But you know what? They had a number and they couldn't meet. They came back with a figure of over $1 million for that house. So they just couldn't afford it. So yes, they tried to buy that because we were going to move it across from the library for the historical society for City of Loganville so people could see that, because our history, if we don't keep it, it's going to die. So yes, we do all this stuff. What you're hearing on Facebook from these people is one-sided. So yes, all that's being talked about in this plan. So that's,
I appreciate you sharing.
You're welcome.
Hey, Tricia, yeah, we're not, like he said, we're not after historical places, and let me tell you, we are pushing definitely, I've got dogs too, so but we gotta get started first before we implement, we talk about the dog parks, but yeah, that's one of the things that we're talking about, having a livable, walkable more, where you could bring your dogs, I could bring mine, and we could,
Something for the community.
more community, absolutely, Tricia.
And the other historical was the well, which is very historical to the city because that's what defined our half-mile radius back in 1887. That will be incorporated if this goes through into some type of, if there's a restaurant there, it will be incorporated into that. The rock gym, the ag building, they're going to stay. They're not going to be torn down.
Thank you.
Going back to the church, we wanted to have a church down. That was another false narrative that was put out there that the city was going to take it down. The Methodist Church, we met with them. We want to incorporate their church and the First Baptist Church into the development. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Tricia. Yes, Decker, we know you. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. My name is Dan Curry. I live at 607 Roberta Court here in downtown in Loganville, okay? I want to tell you, sir, I think your assessment is good. Thank you. I totally believe, we need to redevelop downtown Loganville. I mean, I was the guy who went into the closings time after time, and we bought property in downtown for the reason of redeveloping downtown. Yes, we need some mixed use down there. 800 apartments, to be honest with you, and now I'm not a member of anything, I'm just a citizen, okay? It scared me. Quite frankly, I think the 200, 300 apartments, I think would be good. I think, what are you talking about, 30,000 square feet of retail to start off with? Is that what you're saying?
15 to 20. 15 to 20, yes, sir.
15 to 20, okay, that's even better. Because I'm a conservative kind of guy. And I believe Loganville is a conservative kind of city. And you build that, and once it's successful, you can always grow. If you overgrow it, it's hard to cut it back. When you cut it back, you're going to lose one way or the other. This lady back here, what's your name again? Tracy. Tracy, you had a great idea. You know, if Conley walks, I think it could be a great community initiative to bring in local developers, local money, and you can build pretty much what you want, and it will be a citizen's project. Okay, but I'm an old man, I don't know a whole lot anymore, but you know, if you build, say, 300 apartments, 250, 300 apartments, 250, to my estimation, better, 300 is fine. But I think if you assess what's going on in this area, I know we have the, I think there's about 200 or 300 apartments being built over off 81, is that correct? Over off 81 in the Logan Point area?
Yeah.
Townhomes, that's what, 300, 200?
No, 200.
200. And then you got this initiative going on out on Tommy Lee. I'm not sure how many is out there. What's the count on that?
120.
121. I mean, that's still up for grabs. But there's still two other pieces of property that's zoned for apartments. You have 57 acres down off 78, down next to the high school that we discussed back in 2013. But see, once you start opening up to apartments, you're going to get more and more per house. There's also another part over next door to my subdivision, over off of Sheridan Church Road, which was zoned back in about 06 for senior living, but it says an RM8 zoning. You've also got, I had lunch with Wayne Mason a few months ago, and he's looking at this acreage out here off 78. I think that's the Jaffe property. That may be the property you discussed earlier, but I think he's talking about 300 apartments. I'm not sure what the status on that was. I think it was tabled. But what I'm telling you is this. In my estimation, in the next 5 or so years, you can have over 1,000 apartments with 250 here within 2 miles of where I'm standing. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
All right, I've been informed, perfect timing. I've been informed that we need a break, okay? We will answer your question, 5-minute break. There's a couple of people that need to use the restroom. Okay, we'll be back in a minute. And please don't leave.
TV cameras have got out. Yeah. Well, he's doing an interview. Channel 2 is here. Who? WSB? Yeah, they're here for a minute. They have 2 on their camera.
They got to do something about the infrastructure first.
Yeah, I talked to him.
Danny, we're waiting on you. Danny, we're waiting on you.
So, you know.
All right, we are back. We are back. Thank you for all that stayed. All right, we had a few questions. I know you, but we had one over here, right? Before we left. Any other questions? Nothing. Go ahead. Don Walker, go ahead, sir.
I understand from one of the tenants Don Walker again. I understand from one of the tenants downtown, and I hope this is not true, he said the city came and said, either sell us your 3 buildings or we're going to take them in eminent domain. And I mean, this was a tenant, so.
No.
You know, we said it, okay.
No, that's not true. I have spoke to clarify, I have spoke to 3 property owners, not on Main Street, about the possible use of eminent domain, but we encouraged them to meet with the developer. 2 of the 3 did, and I believe have contracts. The other one did not want to meet, did not want to do a deal, so the project was designed around that person.
Thanks, Don. Go ahead, I think, no, the lady over here, right here, she wanted to say something.
I just want to say, I can appreciate where you're coming from, that you feel like you're doing what they wanted you to do, and that you've lived out here your whole life. And so I can understand how if you grew up out here, you want to see, like you're tired of driving 25 minutes to Kroger. Because when I first moved out here about 20 years ago, you had to go all the way up to Rosebud to go to Kroger. You had to go to Snellville to go to Walmart. And though it is nice to have Kroger on the corner right there or something like that, I want you to think about, like, when you say it's going to pass us by, or we're going to miss out, I don't think so. I mean, I understand what you're saying, you want to build up all this stuff, but from someone who came, I was raised in Maryland in a very overpopulated area and moved down to Georgia. I grew up in Norcross in Gwinnett County and was so happy to get out of there 20 years ago to come out here. And a lot of people came out here and invested their money in homes and families and raising their children out here. And although I can appreciate the fact that you've been out here and you want to see development, because there's been nothing out here, you're missing the charm and the real essence of what is Loganville out here. That I'm so glad I'm not raising my children in Gwinnett or now Snellville or Lawrenceville. I'm so glad that I'm not in that. So it's upsetting seeing it come out. And when you pass Nashville, like if you want to, you know, redevelop the downtown, I can understand that. I think it's a great idea. I would love to have places, like we have all these different, you know, like they said, 3 chicken places and all these things that I really don't feel like we need, like another UPS store or whatever. I would love to have like community things where we could all gather and go do things and put our money into. Places the family can go have fun or do things like that, because the bowling alley is really not doing it so much for us. But I'm just saying, I think there's a point where you can overdo it. I mean, you really don't want to be living in Lawrenceville. You want the hometown feel. And even though it could pass us by, like, I think maybe people need to understand why it is that we need to do this. Do we need the tax dollars, or do we need the money for the schools, or do we need the money for something that's why we're doing it, like such overgrowth or something like that? Or can it just be like a more, like, it could be that our appeal is the fact that we're not like everybody else, 15 minutes in every direction.
Mr. Lansing said that, and I'm going to let him answer your concern about where it gets skipped. Can you talk about if we don't do it, or we do do it, can you tell Dana how other communities may skip us by if we don't take this approach?
Well, I guess I'm not trying to speak in such an absolute term or evoke any kind of fear mongering in that. It's just that that you know, when developers, be it retail or apartment, you know, they are attracted to business-friendly environments, and if you just shut the doors and say we don't want anybody here coming and building in our community, then they will move on. So, you know, ultimately that's up to the council. That has nothing to do with us in terms of what you want your city to be. But there is that risk, of course, that, you know, if you keep saying no to folks, that they're just not going to come back and try.
But also maybe if there's development, like, I'm sorry, I'll stop, like 15, 20 minutes, it's the same thing in every direction. Every place you go, we're just going to be the same thing as everybody, 15 minutes from here, 20 minutes from here. If we get skipped over, and at any point in the future, we decide that we want to be just like Lawrenceville or Snellville or whatever, I really don't see somebody saying is, no, now we're not going to help, like, we're not going to do anything for you.
And on the community charm, there's nothing better to me, than the community charm. We make the community, me and you, and there's a way that we can build a community by us focusing on downtown and coming to downtown, just like Miss Elliott said out there, dog park. I got dogs, she's got dogs too. We could come together